Well, let's see if I can get a video done before the dogs start barking. It's like they have a CCTV camera down there, and as soon as I turn the camera on, they start barking. But anyway, I really wanted to just do a late night meandering, which I haven't done for such a long time, and a few of you crazier people seem to like these, so here we go. I really wanted to, if you are on the borderline of thinking about the New Age, and if you look at how you can visualize what you want, there's been some videos, a very popular movement that started where you could actually visualize what you want, and it would happen. So all of that, there's some middle ground there. How does it actually affect you? How do you affect where you live and how you live? And it is really true that you create your own reality. That was the buzz phrase, wasn't it? Well, you create your own reality. But what does it mean? How do you use it? Many years ago, when I was a lad, yes, at one time I was just a lad, and I met a man who was a research physicist at Aldermaston. I've mentioned it many times because he was a very important person in my life. We all meet people who, for some reason, they become, well, for many reasons, they become someone who influences the way that your life actually unfolds. And this man was Noel Huntley. You can actually buy books by Noel Huntley. Sadly, I believe that he has passed now, but because he and I communicated on the internet, there's no way now that he stopped answering my emails. You have to assume that something's happened. But anyway, he was an incredibly talented person, and he turned me on to visualizing the kind of effect that you want. So I remember how he told me that I could improve my trombone playing, which was of great interest to me at the time, was by imagining the thing. Now, this was in 60s that I learned about this, and it didn't become better known until later, certainly not to me, not to take credit for that, because I learned it from Noel Huntley, who was a doctor, research, as I say, a research scientist at Aldermaston, which some of your old geezers from the UK will remember. There used to be the nuclear bomb. There was a walk, the Aldermaston Walk, once a year, and they'd march down there and protest at the gates of the nuclear establishment. So anyway, so that was a long time ago, and he taught me how to visualize. Of course, as I said, so much has come about since then about visualizing. They did research on the skills that a basketball player can develop just by the mind, and it has become much more accepted now. Back then, it just seemed like a load of rubbish. I never thought that, and I used it very, very well. Just a simple example of how you can use the power of the mind to actually influence what you're doing in a way which will be in the future. And I remember seeing a letter. Now this is, it sounds like a very trivial letter. It wasn't for me, but it was what I always think of it now as the signed. It was a letter to the newspapers, and it was signed Housewife in Sheffield. I'm sure that's what I at least came to know it by. And this lady had written in and said, when I am doing some project which is important to me, that I want to turn out very, very well, she said, what I do is I imagine people that I know their voices, and I can easily imagine them. I hear them in my mind. I hear them saying, wow, Doris, that is so incredible. How did you manage to do that? And somebody else said, Doris, it looks just perfect. I wish I could do that. And she would hear all of this praise, imaginary praise from these voices that she was imagining in her mind. And she would hear them praising what she did. And so the effect on her, she noticed, was that she worked to a much higher standard. Whatever it was, it could have been crocheting baby boots for all I know. But so the question it begs is, what comes first, the praise or the standard? Well, in that particular case, the praise came first because it influenced her to produce something that was of great skill, required great skill, and ended with something of great beauty. And I took that and I used that myself. So even when I wasn't playing the trombone, which was very important to me at that time, that was what I wanted to be, was a professional musician. I was actually a professional musician because even though I was in the army, I played the trombone for my wages. I was in an army band. Now, what I did with the help of my friend Noel, he advised me in difficult position maneuvers. So his suggestion was that I would imagine the trombone being played, and that I would imagine my hand going out to any given position, and that it would arrive in the perfect place. Now, when you play the trombone, you have a slide that moves along this shaft. So you have the first position, second position, third position, fourth position, and it's vitally important to get the position perfectly right, because if it's not, if the position is too far this way, it will be very sharp in pitch, and if it's too far that way, it will be flat. Now that gets down to intonation. So when you get, it's vitally important to hit the right position to get the right note. And I would visualize this even when I wasn't playing. And I would play in my mind. And later I read about research that had been done, as I was saying a moment ago, about basketball players. And what they did was, because people are interested in this and it was easy to get people to come along and take part in an experiment, they took, say, let's invent the numbers, they took 10 people and they had them practice shooting a hoop, right? So they'd be there and they'd be given a ball and a hoop, and they would practice shooting the hoop and trying to get it in, and they would practice until they got it right. And as they practiced, they became better and better. Now that was the first 10 who did the practical. The second 10 players, what they did was they got them to sit in a chair with no visuals at all, and imagine how the ball felt in their hand. Imagine the movement of the hands as they let go of the ball, and see the trajectory of the ball going into the air and then coming back down perfectly into the hoop. And they would do that, and they would do that for the required number of minutes a day. So let's say that they practiced shooting the hoops for, say, 15 minutes, and the imagination people, they sat for the same amount of time and they shot the hoop, and they They visualized it in their mind, shooting the hoop and going perfectly into it. Now, before either of them took part in the experiment, they tested them on how good they were. They were all players, but they tested them first, the people that were going to shoot the hoops, and they got a good idea, or in a scale of say 1 to 10, they got a good idea of how good they were at shooting hoops. Now, they also tested the people who were going to doing it all in the mind, and they tested them as to how they're good. And they found that the difference between the two was not as great as you would think, because the first group were actually practicing. The second group were only practicing in their mind. So it shows that the routines that you think of in your mind are very important, even to the acquiring of a skill. Now, with me, for the trombone, I would imagine playing the trombone, and this became a habit for me. I used to imagine playing and hearing the sound. Now, the thing about playing an instrument is, especially with a brass instrument, the trombone especially, because there are no marks on the slide and there are harmonics, which the harmonics are stacked on top of each other. Okay, and then as you play, those harmonics go down like this. So you go down in semitones. Ba da 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 da, ba da 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 da, ba da da. You get the idea. So it's important to be able to hear the note before you play it. So I would imagine playing it, and it became, as I said, became such a habit that I continued to do this even when I no longer owned a trombone, because it was just habit. Whereas most people may be, I don't know, say some teenager who was singing in her mind even, or singing out loud, he would imagine the person who had originally recorded that, and they would imagine it in their mind, and they'd see them. So the visualization is extremely important. I hadn't played, when I started playing again, I left the UK playing. I was able to play very well, had in the recent years had been a professional trombone player, so I was still playing in my mind very, very well. Now, when I went to California, the US, I didn't have a trombone. One of life's great ironies. I'd always dreamed of going to America to play with some of the great musicians that I revered. I had to sell my trombone to buy a ticket. So, one of life's great ironies. But I arrived in 1992 in California, and I didn't play the trombone for 17 years. In fact, I didn't play it physically. But as anybody that is fond of singing, anybody that even thinks the songs in their head, they hear them in their head, I played the trombone. And after 17 years, I was able to buy a trombone and to begin playing again. And as soon as I picked up the trombone, I was able to play. And within a very, very short time, I was able to get back to a high percentage of the skill that I'd had 17 years prior. Now, what good is this to you, to anybody? Well, you can imagine a better life. You can imagine it happening, and to the degree that you can visualize, it's visualization rather than saying it's imagination. even though for some it might be just semantics. I'm just saying one thing and then it could be described in another way. So the way that I was able to use it in many ways, which anybody can use, you can use the housewife from Sheffield idea, and so that when you're doing anything, and I do this now, I did this with my artwork. I would, when I was sculpting, when I was drawing, I would imagine that people that were seeing it in the future were saying in the present, wow, Terence, this is great. All right, you're patting yourself on the back, but the result will be felt. You will find out the result. Now here's how it influences our daily behavior, is that if you creating in your mind a situation where you fail and imagining it failing, let's say that you have a difficult interview coming up and you need that interview to be a success. Now, if you keep imagining the interview going wrong, the chances are that when you get to the interview, guess what? It'll go wrong. The reason is that you've already rehearsed it going wrong in your head. Now, I remember my friend Noel, when I was about to go for an audition, he said, well, if you can get to the place where you are going to take the audition, it would be good if you can go in and just so that you can see where you're going to be standing when you take the audition. And that's what I did. And he said, and then once you've done that, you practice on the stage that you're going to be standing a successful audition where the housewife from Sheffield says, wow, what a great audition. You did really great. We would really love to have you play with us. You know, when can you start? What, you know, let's work out what you're, and all of this positive thing. Now, this is not, it's not some kind of whimsical way of pretending. It's not just that. One of the, possibly the greatest scientist of all time was Nikola Tesla. And Tesla's imagination, his visualization was so perfect that he used to design electrical and otherwise motors, little engines, which he could design in his mind. And he is actually quoted as saying that he never actually started work on the bench until he had visualized every single part of that engine. And the saying goes that he was able to design a motor, put it all together in his mind, and set it running. So there in the corner of his mind is this engine which he has designed perfectly and which he knows is going to work. And he watches it as it works. And he sees the parts and he sees them turning. Have you ever seen those cutaway drawings of engines? He was able in his mind to cut away the engine so that he saw all of the moving parts. And in seeing the moving parts, he was able to visualize the possible places where there would be excess wear, and to deal with that problem in his mind before he put his tools to work on the bench. So you imagine that. If you can imagine, if you can create for yourself a skill in visualization, you could actually change your life in very real terms, very much. One of the ways that this is going on in your mind now is, I'm sure that everybody has heard of the idea of self-evaluation, where you think of yourself in a certain way. And one of the things that is most damaging is if you have very little value to yourself. That is how you will be visualizing yourself. So imagine this thing. I used to say to people, if you really want to know whether you're happy, say out loud, I'm really happy, and then listen to the inner voice that responds to you, to that statement. Oh yeah, sure, you're happy, all right. What about all of that debt? Where are you going to find the rent for next week? Or that voice will be one which agrees with what you are. Now, this is where you begin to find how it affects you if you are behaving badly. If you are behaving badly, then your own appraisal of yourself will be very realistic. It's our own cruel critic. They often say that you are your own worst enemy, and that's because you allow negative chatter to be going on in your mind, which will downgrade you. That's why it's so important. It's not a matter of being unrealistic about your skills. It's a matter of allowing yourself to be as good as you really are, and the chance to be even better. So I hope that this kind of talk actually helps, because I found that it's completely realistic. You know, what they're doing now, they're talking now in quantum physics. They're talking about how there are other realities. They're talking about virtual realities. And virtual realities are created by you, that you can have a virtual self. So when you get to the crossroads in town and one road leads to your favorite restaurant and the other one leads to the hospital, metaphorically speaking, depending on how you decide to go, you could in your mind say, well, I don't know that I want to be going to the right because that's to the hospital. I want to be going to my favorite restaurant. So you turn and you go to your favorite restaurant. But in some other dimensional way, your other self has gone to the hospital. Now, a lot of people might be in a great deal of trouble because they allow for the other one going to the hospital to be too real. And the more real that it gets, the more likely it is that you will fail. So it's really important to think of yourself as winning and to go ahead and do the housewife in Sheffield. Wow, how did you manage to do that? Oh my God, this is so incredible. I wish I had that talent. You are so incredibly talented. Look how beautiful that is. And on and on. Hey, go for it, and you'll find some really big improvements if you do this. If you set out at the beginning of the day and say, today it's going to go great. I'm going to meet people who just can't wait to help me. This actually happens to me now. I am what I call, somebody else, I think my friend Jen Muller, she told me what the psychological term for it, but I call it a reverse paranoia. paranoia, of course, is where you go in and you go, oh my God, everybody going to be trying to kill me today. I'll never do any good. And the other one is where you say, I know that everybody's just going to run out to help me today. It's all going to go so incredibly well. And it will. And it will. So, if you like the meanderings, look out for them, and I'll waffle again. Bye for now.